Let's take you further afield now. The trial of Derek Chauvin, a former police officer who faces second-degree murder charges for the death of George Floyd, is officially now underway. Chauvin is notorious. He's known in the U.S. for kneeling on his gasping victim for 9 minutes in May of 2020, even as George Floyd cried out that he couldn't breathe. Floyd's death sparked violent anti-racism protests across the United States and, in fact, around the world as well, placing racial tensions in the U.S. on a knife's edge. Civil rights activist Al Sharpton told a crowd that gathered outside the courtroom that although Chauvin was in the dock, America itself is on trial. This trial seen as a referendum on how far the country has come in its quest for justice for all. Now, Devin Barrington-Ward is from the Black Futurists group. He joins us now from Atlanta in the U.S. Devin, it's great to have you with us. Way past midnight in Atlanta in the U.S., perhaps a testament to how passionate you are as this incredible murder trial gets underway in the U.S. It's a moment for your country. The question is, will the U.S. rise to this occasion?
Well, first, good morning to you all, and I am a passionate advocate, but I also happen to be a night owl, so it's not past my bedtime just yet. But I do think that this trial is an opportunity for the United States to really potentially live up to all of the ideals that it claims to be on paper, a place where there's justice and there's due process, a place where we supposedly are supposed to have rights that are equal to all citizens, but we know that the Black citizenry here, along with many other racial groups, experience a lack of justice in our criminal legal system here in the United States. And that is indicative through this trial and indicative through the way that George Floyd died on the streets of Minneapolis last summer.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we talk about America itself being on trial. It's also, you know, seeking justice for the murder of George Floyd, but also justice for so many other Black Americans, so many unarmed Black men in America who have been killed at the hands of police.
Absolutely. I think that this is the reason why it sparks so much emotion is because this is a narrative and a story that too many Black families are familiar with here in the United States. I myself, at the age of 5, saw my father beat up by the local police department here, by 5 or 6 police officers. I was left inside of a store until my mother could come and get me, and this was in 1995, so cell phones weren't as prevalent. I was left with strangers while the police carted my father off to jail. The charges were later dropped, and the police officers who assaulted my father were never reprimanded. No one was fired. No one was charged criminally. No one lost their job. There was no justice. And so many families like myself, I was fortunate that I did not lose my father in that incident. But I know I lost a piece of my father because he lost a piece of his dignity. He lost a piece of his pride. To see and the fact that his child had to witness, his son had to witness him being assaulted by those who were supposed to protect and serve. My father was a taxpayer and, you know, contributes to the community in the ways in which he was able to, like so many other Black families who have experienced the horrors of police brutality and the expansion of the police state. And it's unfortunate that so many Black communities here in the United States only see government investment in the form of police stations, jails, squad cars, surveillance equipment, and not genuine investment that seeks to change the material conditions of the communities that many of us call home, so that we can be grounded in a narrative and a vision that is really about true public safety, which centers the safety of all of us, not just a select few.
Yeah, I wonder how difficult it is to find a Black man, a Black family in America who doesn't have a story like the one you've just told.
You know, it is unfortunate. It is quite common, and for the families that oftentimes don't talk about it, it's because it's a trauma that many of us have to suppress. Many of us try to move on because if we don't, we will get consumed. You know, as James Baldwin has said, to be Black in America and to be relatively conscious is to be in a perpetual state of rage. But that is also grounded in joy because many of us know that this is the incidents from the murder of George Floyd to the insurrection attacks that took place on January 6th is really an indication that this is white supremacy's last stand. And those of us who are frontline organizers feel very blessed and privileged to be witnessing a time where we are advocating and demanding the rights of our people and that we right the wrongs of the past. And in response to that, we are seeing a death spiral of white supremacy in this country through desperate acts of desperation, which indicate that it's losing its grip on this country and that the side of freedom is on our side.
Devin, I want to talk to you about, what so many people have said, particularly the people who gathered outside the courthouse as the trial got underway. And one of the things one of those protesters said was, and we've seen it before in cases like this going to trial, she said she's not looking forward to how George Floyd will surely be slandered and having all of his background brought up as this trial gets underway. How do you reckon? I mean, are you afraid of that as well? Are you expecting that as well?
We've already seen some of that. The defense for the officer who murdered George Floyd has already put out there the narrative that George Floyd's death was as a result of his struggle with substance abuse and not from an officer that we see clearly kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 10 minutes as he cried out for his mother and gasped for air. And so it is important that those of us who are watching this, that we set the narrative that George Floyd is not on trial. Derek Chauvin is on trial, and so is the Minneapolis Police Department and police departments across the country, who, regardless of whether there's a guilty or not guilty verdict, can rise to the occasion and decide to do things differently in the ways in which they police Black and brown people. Political leaders don't have to wait until a jury decides to come back with a verdict. They can make decisions right now that can benefit their citizenry, particularly the Black citizens that live in their communities. And so this is a moment where we don't have to wait for the criminal legal system to provide justice for George Floyd. George Floyd's justice can be found in ensuring that we are reallocating resources and funding from police departments so that we can put more funding towards mental health services and substance abuse services and building our communities into places that are truly safe so that we reduce the need for policing in our communities. So often we use police here in the United States as a knee-jerk response, as a quick Band-Aid to solutions to problems that were created by elected officials grounded in a white supremacist framework. And so we've got to be honest about that. We've got to be authentic about that. And we've got to name that and speak to that boldly. And so this trial is an opportunity for the entire country to have that conversation, but we can find justice beyond this trial. My hope is that we do get a guilty verdict, but if we don't, what I'm also hopeful for, regardless of a guilty verdict, is to see public policy that truly illustrates that people in this country who have the ability to make decisions that could have changed the outcome of what happened to George Floyd actually do that, and that people across the country stand up and demand that as well. And we're seeing lots of that through the uprisings that have been sustained through the political season and the elections that we saw, and the rejection of Donald Trump. Here in Georgia, here in Atlanta, we sent the first Jewish U.S. senator from the South and the first Black senator from the state of Georgia in our election. We sent them to Washington, D.C., and that was connected to not just the response around the pandemic, but also connected to the response around people wanting to see true reimagining of public safety and no longer quick Band-Aids and talking points.
Yeah, absolutely. A big moment in your country. Devin, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Absolutely.
Joining us from Atlanta, well after midnight, almost 1 a.m. in Atlanta in the U.S. That is the trial of Derek Chauvin. That's the former police officer who faces second-degree murder charges for the murder of George Floyd, officially now getting underway.